Now, you may or may not notice a slight difference in audio between Glen and I this episode, because we're having to do this remotely. As we all know, family comes first, and sometimes things come up, so we have to do things a bit differently.
Hello everyone, welcome to SwitchUp. Today we've got our monthly score roundup video for you. We're going to be looking at all of the games that we reviewed for the month of November, and then ranking them from the lowest placed score up until, of course, the highest.
As always, you can save yourself some money on the eShop using code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg, and we do now support Canada as well. So yeah, go check that out, and we get a little kickback from Nintendo. You save about 10%.
So which game got the highest score for the month of November? Well, let's find out. So in 10th place then we had My Time at Sandrock. This is a farming simulator with an action RPG feel to it in some respects, and is a sequel to My Time at Pacha, albeit this time it's set post a cataclysmic event. You'll need to rebuild the world, and it follows a lot of the tropes that you would expect of a farming simulation game. There's plenty to do for sure, and there is a good ratio of farming and combat here with a good addictive gameplay loop. Now there were some issues at launch, a few bugs and some performance issues, and some of this was addressed with a day one patch, with some other issues promised to be fixed within the first month of launch, and had they been present at launch it may well have scored a bit higher, but still a good game, and thankfully now some of those issues have been addressed and it got a SwitchUp score of 75%. In 9th place then we had a game called Air Twister. Now this is an on-rails shooting game that comes from Yu Suzuki, who had a big hand in a lot of the Sega arcade games back in the day, things such as Hang On, Outrun, etc. And this also included Space Harrier, which this particular game Air Twister is very similar to. You'll make your way through a fantasy land, destroying the enemies as you go, taking on huge bosses as you get to the end of each stage, and it does have a few different game modes to play through, which is nice. It runs at a consistent 30 frames per second, and for the most part the presentation is good. There were a few bits that held it back. In particular, I just felt the music didn't suit the on-screen action. It's not bad music necessarily, it wasn't to my tastes, but it just didn't really fit what was going on screen, and to me this had a detrimental effect to the overall time I had with it. With that being said though, I still enjoyed it. I like these sort of games. If you've got any sort of affinity for the arcade shooters of the 80s, this is a good one to pick up, and it got a SwitchUp score of 78%.
On to Hogwarts Legacy, which came out on the Nintendo Switch not long ago, and was I think one of our biggest videos of all time. It's almost at 500,000 views, which is ridiculous. And that video was mainly about the performance, but I've played Hogwarts Legacy on 2 other platforms now, so we did also score it. On the Switch, yes, you're going to have a bit of a downgrade in almost every visual area, but actually it's not too bad. I'm still waiting for that first patch to see what they can do, but you're looking at 30 FPS generally across the board, even in the open worlds. Things like flying around on your broom, they're actually okay, but the difference for the Switch version is there are a few more loading transitions, and when I say a few more, I mean a lot more. Especially in places like Hogsmeade, you'll have to load to get into the town, and then you have to load in and out of every single building, which does definitely affect the immersion. Still, it was a good game and I enjoyed it a lot, and it got an overall SwitchUp score of 79%.
In 7th place then we had Football Manager 2024 Touch, the latest in the Touch version of Football Manager to hit the Switch. And this does a lot of the good things that the previous games had done. It gives you a huge database of players and teams from across the world, and it does improve some aspects too, particularly when it comes to controls, which had let this series down on the Switch in the past. They've added some little tweaks, things like radial wheels that do really improve it, and just generally trying to use the touch controls feels much better than it had before. The match engine itself even feels a bit better on the Switch now. The gameplay definitely looks a bit smoother, which allows for some of the passages of play to look a bit more intricate when playing with the 3D mode on, and on the whole this got a SwitchUp score of 80%.
And after that one, if we ever see Glen again, it'll be a miracle, because my goodness, you've never seen a man play Football Manager as much as this guy does. Next up, we've got Turok 3, which comes from the legendary Night Dive Studios, who are doing so much to bring back old classic games to the Nintendo Switch. And Turok 3 is just another example. These feel more like remakes than remasters. Not only do they completely change the visuals, they change the control methods, and they very often put in new content. Here, they remodel a lot of those enemies, they introduce a load of new lighting effects, and they're just brilliant to play. Silky smooth, gyro controls, everything you'd want. And I never had played Turok 3 back in the day. I'd only ever kind of played the first one, a bit of the second one, back when it ran at 19 frames per second on the N64. So playing it at 60, this is the definitive experience. It's absolutely great. Go check out our full review, but that got a SwitchUp score of 81%, putting it at 6th position. Then coming in just in front of that at 5th, we have Salt and Sacrifice. You might recognise that name, it might ring some bells. It is the sequel to Salt and Sanctuary and comes from the very small husband and wife team. It took things in a slightly different direction that some people didn't like. And interestingly, they've actually changed some core gameplay mechanics since it first came out on PC and was slated, and they're things that really do improve the experience. Predominantly, they actually removed fast travel from the first build, which was a stupid idea because you know what it's like, enemies respawn and having to go back through those entire areas. It was lame. So they've put fast travel between beacon points back in, and it's so much better. Now the thing that differentiates this from your traditional Souls-like is that it has these mage hunts. So you have these like side quests where you have to hunt specific mages. They have these unique abilities and you have to like track them across a stage. It's quite cool. Like someone mentioned it was a bit like Monster Hunter. Not so much in my opinion, but I get where they're coming from. You have to fight them a few times before you eventually face them in the boss fight. It still has the Souls-like bosses dotted around the stage as well, so it's not completely gone away from its roots. But the quality of life improvements, the little hub area where you can level up and stuff, it'll feel very familiar to most Souls players. A really good game. It got a SwitchUp score of 84%. Then in joint third, we have Roots of Pacha, which just came out, and the review literally came out yesterday. Do check that one out. I saw a comment, this is prehistoric Stardew Valley, and that's probably the most apt way of describing it. However, I think what that doesn't really do justice to is the community aspect of the game. And I don't mean community as in like us and other gamers. I mean, it's built around a tribe, and you have to do tasks for the tribe, which build up its standing, and then they make new discoveries and things. And there's also basically what's called an ideas system, which means that a certain tribesman member will have an idea, obviously, and if you help them fulfill that idea, that then gives you a new item or a new thing to construct, sometimes new buildings. It's really good because it manages to do something that a lot of these games try to do, but it's very superficial, and that's create community and relationships. It still has that relationship element where you can romance certain players and do all of that stuff, but as far as community, I think this does it better in many ways than Stardew Valley, and it really is a very enjoyable game. It got a SwitchUp score of 87%.
And the other game in joint third for the month then was Super Mario RPG. This is a remake of the game that first released in 1996, coming via Square for the Super Nintendo, and it's a game that didn't actually release in Europe back then, so it was my first time playing it. Now of course the graphics have had a big overhaul, removing the pre-rendered sprites of the original game and going for a full 3D look, albeit still using that isometric viewpoint. And they've also included some tweaks to the turn-based gameplay, including new team powers, with each of the characters having their own specialised attack, and experiencing all of these was good fun. Now I will say the game is quite simple, both in terms of its mechanics but also in terms of the general difficulty, and whilst I didn't feel this was detrimental to the game at all, in fact I really enjoyed having a game that I could play at a more casual level if you like. It is something that you might want to bear in mind if you like your RPGs, to really challenge you. That being said, it's a lovely game, really so much polish, so much charm, really beautiful cutscenes have been added this time just to extend that further still, and I really enjoyed being able to finally play it. It also got a SwitchUp score of 87%.
Yeah, I really must get on that Super Mario RPG, it just looks amazing. So then we've got in second position Risk of Rain Returns, which, I mean, Glen first told me about the first Risk of Rain, that this is basically a remaster of, and it was definitely featured as an addictive game. Now this is just, oh my goodness, it's such a good game. You basically get dropped into a stage, you've got enemies constantly coming, like constantly attacking you and you're doing damage to, but you have to find a warp gate and activate it, and then things really kick off. The difficulty ramps right up and you're trying to survive long enough, sometimes kill a boss in that time as well, before the warp gate becomes active and you can move on to the next area. You can do all of this with a friend as well. I think it's either 2-player co-op or it might even be 4-player co-op. But either way, that's offline or online. I really did enjoy reviewing this one. Sometimes it's just a lot easier than at other times, and games that are this fun, yeah, like we're going to talk about in the number 1 spot, are just much easier. This got a SwitchUp score of 91%. That then brings the number 1 spot, Star Ocean Second Story Art. This was an interesting old one because obviously I had to do quite a bit of homework to figure out why they'd chosen the second game. And that involved actually watching an hour-long video recap of the first game's story, and we'd covered it on the channel as well, so I was trying to just piece together exactly the initial response to the Star Ocean Second, and it very much is the fan favourite, and that's for a very good reason. Now this is another of Square Enix's HD 2D or that semi-2D, 3D style that we've seen in a few other games, and it looks stunning. Now the storyline as well was so engaging. I find RPGs can, and I say this in the nicest possible way, they can just be really boring now. They can be like, oh, you need to save the world from this, blah, blah, blah. Now, as a big science fiction fan, seeing the science fiction setting and the way it's introduced here, almost like something out of Star Trek that then goes awry. I thought it was great. Having the 2 different protagonists to choose from, which also changes some of the story beats, is really nice. But it was a system of jobs that they built into it. Now, we've seen them do that with the Bravely Default games, and to really good effect. But here, it really is intrinsic to the overall experience, and it's not just combat abilities. It's things like being able to take photographs or create artworks as a team and solo as well. But if others in the team have got that ability, you can then create even better things. It does these synergies, and you might be able to use items that buff you or create crafted items and weapons. It was outstanding, and I don't say that lightly. As someone who came from the materia system of Final Fantasy VII, for me, this is one of the best JRPG systems of building up your character, leveling up, that feels hands-on, that I've seen in a long time, but also doesn't feel completely conflated and out of control. Really enjoyed it. An amazing experience, lovely visuals, fantastic soundtrack, and it's the game that's actually got me into physical collecting. I've picked up this one, I've picked up a few other games now, but yeah, this has finally kind of tipped me over the scales. I instantly bought the Japanese one because I preferred the artwork. We do have a link to our Play Asia. If you want to save yourself 5%, you can do that. But yeah, a really, really good game. Don't be put off just because it's the second. You don't need to have played the first, you really don't. That one got a SwitchUp score of 93%.
So there you have it, another month of SwitchUp reviews. Did you pick up any of these games? What did you think of them? Did you agree with our scores? Let us know in the comment section below. Are there any games that we didn't review? Of course, this can only be games that we've reviewed, that you played, and what score would you have given those games? Please, again, let us know down below. Apologies, this one did have to be done a bit differently, as Mark alluded to at the beginning. My little boy's not been very well, so I've been on daddy daycare duty, but we will be back together to do it as we normally do for next month's edition. Don't forget, if you are looking for eShop credit to pick any of these games up, you can get your eShop cards via our website, switchup.gg. Doing so will get you 5% back in cashback against a future purchase, and you can also get a 5% straight discount by using the code SwitchUp. And as Mark mentioned at the beginning of the video, we can now offer this service to Canada, which is lovely. There's also a link down there to Play Asia. If you want to import any games, again, use the link, use the code stated, and you get yourself 5% off of your order from there. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.